There comes a day when your silence feels heavier than all the words you used to waste, and that's the day your power quietly returns. You didn't plan it. There was no dramatic decision, no announcement, no final argument where you said I'm done. It just happened. One day, you looked at people waiting for your explanation, your defense, your emotional proof, and you felt nothing. No urgency, no fear, no need, and in that quiet realization, your entire inner world shifted direction. For a long time, you believed being understood was survival. You thought if people knew your intentions, your pain, your logic, they would treat you fairly. So you explained yourself again and again. Why you reacted that way, why you chose that path, why you couldn't be like everyone else. You gave reasons even when no one asked for them, not because you were weak, but because you still cared. Caring is expensive. It drains energy faster than effort ever will. Explaining yourself places your worth in other people's hands. It silently asks for permission to exist as you are. And the harsh truth is this: people rarely want explanations. They want control. They want to see if you'll bend, if you'll justify, if you'll lower yourself enough to make them comfortable. When you explained yourself, you thought you were clearing misunderstandings. What you were really doing was revealing your emotional position. You showed where you were sensitive, where you doubted yourself, where you needed approval. And the world is very good at exploiting open doors. The day you stopped explaining yourself wasn't about arrogance. It was about clarity. You realized that most people had already decided who you were before you spoke. Your words didn't change their judgment, they only fed it. You noticed how explanations never ended. They invited more questions, more accusations, more expectations. One answer led to another demand. One justification turned into a habit. So you withdrew. Not physically, mentally. Silence became your boundary. At first it felt uncomfortable. Your instincts screamed that you were being rude, cold, distant. You felt the old urge to clarify, to soften the tension, to fix the atmosphere. But you didn't. You stayed still, and that stillness revealed something important. The people who benefited from your explanations were the same people who felt threatened by your silence. Without your words, they lost access. Some reacted with confusion, some with irritation, others with subtle aggression. They tried to pull you back into the familiar role, the one who explains, apologizes, reassures. You refused without saying a single word, and that refusal was louder than any argument you had ever made. You started to see how powerful restraint really is. When you don't explain yourself, people are forced to deal with their own interpretations. They project, they assume, they expose their mindset without realizing it. Silence turns the mirror outward, and most people don't like what they see. This is where the shift becomes dangerous, in a quiet, controlled way. You begin to move without announcing your intentions. You act without narrating your motives. You make decisions without requesting validation. That alone separates you from the majority. Most people live externally. Their confidence depends on reactions. Their direction depends on approval. When you detach from that system, you become unpredictable. Unpredictability creates distance. Distance creates respect. You no longer feel the need to correct every misunderstanding. You understand that clarity is wasted on those committed to misunderstanding you instead of wasting energy on words. You invested in precision, how you speak when it actually matters, how you act when it counts, how you remain composed when others grow emotional. Your presence changes. People notice it before they understand it. Conversations feel different around you. There's a pause where there used to be noise, a hesitation where there used to be dominance. You aren't louder. You aren't aggressive. You're just no longer accessible in the same way. This confuses people who rely on emotional reactions to feel powerful. You see, explaining yourself is an emotional habit. It comes from fear of being judged, fear of being disliked, fear of losing connection. Once you release that fear, explanations lose their grip. You understand that not every connection deserves maintenance. Some connections exist only because you keep feeding them energy. When you withdraw that energy, weak connections collapse. And that's not loss. That's filtration. The day you stopped explaining yourself, your mind grew sharper. You spent less time replaying conversations, less time imagining better responses, less time justifying decisions that already felt right. Mental clarity replaced mental noise. You began to think in outcomes instead of opinions. This is where discipline quietly forms. You become selective with words, selective with people, selective with emotions. You don't react instantly. You don't rush to defend. You observe. You calculate. You decide. That decision-making calm is rare. And rarity always carries weight. Others might mistake it for coldness. Let the warmth given freely loses value. Composure earned through restraint becomes presence. You don't need to convince anyone of your intentions when your actions remain consistent over time. Consistency eliminates the need for explanations. You also realize something uncomfortable but freeing. Many people never listen to you anyway. They were waiting for their turn to speak, waiting to judge, waiting to benefit. Once you accept that, silence no longer feels like suppression. It feels like alignment. You align with your own standards instead of adjusting to external expectations. This alignment creates internal authority. You trust your judgment more. You hesitate less. You second-guess less. Not because you know everything, but because you've accepted responsibility for your choices. Responsibility removes the need to explain. When you own your decisions fully, explanations feel unnecessary. This mindset doesn't make life easier. It makes it cleaner. Fewer emotional debts, fewer social obligations, fewer pointless conflicts. You don't chase understanding. You build results. You don't argue for respect. You embody it quietly. And that quiet begins to intimidate. People who once questioned you now watch you. People who underestimated you now analyze you, not because you demanded attention, but because your absence of explanation creates tension. Tension draws focus. You also become harder to manipulate. Emotional manipulation relies on reactions, on guilt, on pressure. Silence cuts that supply. When you don't explain yourself, manipulators lose their script. They can't twist your words if there are none. They can't trap you in contradictions if you don't overtalk. You become mentally unavailable to games. This is why the discipline of silence is often misunderstood. It's not about being mysterious for image. It's about efficiency. You conserve energy. You protect focus. You choose depth over noise. And over time, something subtle happens inside you. You feel lighter, not because problems disappear, but because you're no longer carrying the emotional weight of everyone's expectations. You let people think what they want. You let situations unfold. You intervene only when necessary. That restraint builds inner strength. You stop needing to win conversations. You aim to win direction. You understand that proving a point rarely improves your life. Progress does. Growth does. Stability does. The day you stopped explaining yourself, you also stopped begging to be seen. You accepted that visibility without substance is meaningless. You don't perform your growth. You live it. And living it quietly creates a different kind of confidence. Not loud, not flashy, grounded. This confidence doesn't come from believing you're superior. It comes from knowing you're solid. You know who you are becoming, even if no one else does yet. You trust the process without narrating it. That trust is dangerous, in the best way. Because while others are busy talking, defending, and reacting, you're moving. While others are stuck in cycles of emotional explanation, you're building skill, discipline, and clarity. Eventually, people will ask fewer questions, not because they suddenly understand you, but because your presence answers them. And if they don't understand you, that's fine. Understanding is optional. Direction is not. The day you stopped explaining yourself wasn't the end of communication. It was the beginning of intentional communication. You speak when it matters. You remain silent when it doesn't. You don't waste words trying to control perception. You let time do that work. And time always favors the disciplined. So if you feel that quiet forming inside you, don't rush to fill it. Let it grow. Let it sharpen you. Let it distance you from unnecessary noise. Because once you master this restraint, you'll realize something most people never do. Your silence was never empty. It was loaded with control.